Thank you, Madam Toastmaster. Most of you know that I'm basically a cat person. You may even hear one of them howling at my feet. Like my cats, I've had at least 9 different lives. How can this be, you say? Well, it's by the process of reinvention. What exactly is reinvention? Reinvention is the action or process through which something is changed so much that it appears to be something entirely new and different. What does it mean to reinvent yourself? To become a different kind of person. To create an entirely new environment for your existence, preferably one that's better than the former one. Why is this important? Well, one of the things that we find about being human is that we crave constant stimulation. Most of us are always looking for different intellectual challenges, different ways of doing things so that we don't feel like we're falling into a rut or worse than that, dying of boredom. And so reinventing oneself is an excellent way to avoid that problem of getting bored. What are the benefits of reinventing yourself? You can totally refresh your life. You can give it the patina of something new. And in the process, you can possibly even assoil yourself of some of your past faux pas. You can respond to outside factors that you have no control over, things like change of employment, things like change in health status. You can get into something new, something that's an adventure, something that's totally different than what you've ever done before. Go out and buy a fancy sports car. The midlife crisis is a good example of a reason to reinvent yourself. And you can also reinvent yourself by ditching bad habits. Are you a smoker? Do you overeat? Do you overindulge in certain things that are not good for your health? Reinvent yourself and get rid of those bad habits. How do you reinvent? How do you go about doing it, you might ask? Well, the first thing you have to do is identify the desired change and then practice some more and practice again. You have to set realistic goals. You can't expect to make a major change in your life in the space of 2 weeks or 30 days or maybe even a couple of months. But if you work on it every day, you can, over time, make these changes happen. You have to constantly monitor yourself and make sure that you're not falling back into your own ways. And then most importantly, you have to surround yourself with truth tellers, people that will not give you lip service or say, oh yeah, you're doing great, or this looks fine, when they don't really mean it. You want people that will tell you the brutal, honest truth and not assoil you from slips in your pledge to make your life different. Finally, you have to take risks sometimes. Remaking yourself, reinventing yourself can involve an enormous amount of risk, financial risk, emotional risk, all sorts of risks. But without taking risks, we don't grow, we don't learn. Some of the reasons to reinvent yourself: financial goals. Everybody would like to have more money. Boredom. As a coping mechanism to be able to deal with changes that are beyond your control. Health. Improving your health is always a good reason to reinvent yourself. And sometimes, because we're human, we have altruistic tendencies. You might be totally driven to go out and help the homeless, or to put on a campaign for the citizens of Ukraine. Altruistic methods are one of the things that differentiate human beings from the rest of the animal kingdom. Now, what forces drive a reinvention? Decisions, external forces, and the desire for adventure. The first time I reinvented myself, I was a student. I was in my 9th and final semester at Washington University in St. Louis. I was faced with a decision. 9 months after I finished my classes at the end of December, I would have to start paying back on my student loans. And I had 3 choices. I could either go back to Staten Island, where I grew up, or I could stay in St. Louis, or I could do something else. And I knew that if I was still in St. Louis when I had to start paying back on my loans, I would probably end up with a job and possibly a wife and kids, and never have the opportunity to go anywhere else. So I just didn't want to stay in St. Louis. An opportunity presented itself. My best friend, Larry, from college, he left after 8 semesters and came back to California. And at the end of November, he announced that he was going to be coming back to St. Louis for a visit. And so I had been at a party one night, and I was walking back to my apartment. I was in a fog because I'd been enjoying some or another chemical stimulant most of the evening. And I'm walking at a brisk pace, and all of a sudden, I just had a flash of inspiration. Larry invited me to come back to California to check it out. I'm gonna go with Larry and go to California. So we packed up everything I owned that I could fit in his Volkswagen Fastback, which is a small hatchback. I don't know if you remember those. We had to time the journey so that we arrived in California on Friday, because it was the middle of the first gasoline crisis, and gas stations basically were just closing up on the weekends. So if we didn't get here by the end of Friday, we'd be stuck wherever we were for 3 days and wouldn't be able to gas up the car. So we crammed everything of mine that we could into his car. I tasked a friend of mine with putting whatever else was left in the apartment into storage, and we split. We came down old Route 66, Interstate 40, drove through LA at night, 11:30 at night. And from what I saw then, I had no inclination to go back to LA. It was years before I ever set foot in LA again. We camped out on the beach at Gaviota State Beach. The next day, we got up, got in the car. It was my birthday in 1974. And the best birthday present I have ever gotten was 250 miles of California coastline. We locked the keys in the car at Gorda, of all places. I finally managed to break into the car. We found an old coat hanger in the dirt, punched through the rubber gasket around the rear window, which it was a pop-out window, and slid the glass a little bit out of the thing after disengaging the clamp with my nail clipper to where we could reach in and undo the lock, open the lock for the door. So we got back in. We got into California. That was the first time I reinvented myself. I just picked up and moved lock, stock, and barrel to California. Within a week, I had a job. Within a month, I had a better job. And I worked at the sugar factory that used to be here in Spreckles for 9 years. 2 years later came my second major reinvention. I decided to quit smoking. 1976. I knew I had to do it. It was a bad habit. They were getting more and more expensive. But I mean, at this point, cigarettes still cost less than $1 a pack. By this time, I would have quit smoking just for the prices of tobacco. But the first thing I did was I quit buying. I made an agreement with a woman that I worked with who smoked the same brand that I did, that I would buy her a carton every month in return for being allowed to bum off of her while I was at work. So right away, I limited my access to cigarettes to 8 hours a day. From March, when this started, until June, I got to where I would smoke, between 1 and 4 cigarettes in a shift. I found out they last a lot longer if you don't light them. Part of the habit is the manipulative aspect. So I put it in my mouth and let it hang there and see how long I could go before I could light it. Well, June came around, the factory shut down. I was put on the labor crew during the down season. And I was working outside with a guy. We were digging up all the mud that had accumulated on a concrete slab. And after a couple of days of bumming, he said, well, okay, but tomorrow you probably ought to bring your own. Something clicked in my head. That was it. 2 days later, I never missed it. I never had another cigarette. It was June 22, 1976. So that was my second reinvention. The next one was not my personal choice. It was due to unforeseen external circumstances. In 1978, I came down with cancer. It was a massive, massive blow to my ego, to my total mentality. Fortunately, one of the things that I've been blessed with over the years is the ability to compartmentalize. When the doctor told me on a Friday, an hour before I was supposed to be to work at 4 p.m., that I had cancer, he was putting me into the hospital and going to take the tumor out on Monday. For about 15 minutes, I totally freaked. And then I just compartmentalized it. I put it in a box and shut the box and said, okay, what do we do now? What are my chances? What am I looking at? Boom, boom, boom. And that compartmentalization really saved me a lot of grief. It was a horrendous prospect. I had 2 surgeries, one to remove the tumor, another one at Stanford. They cut me from here to here, went in and shuffled a bunch of stuff around and took a bunch of stuff out. 3 months after that of chemotherapy, detailed chemotherapy, I dropped down to about 114 pounds. I looked like death warmed over, but I got through it. I had to reinvent myself. One of the biggest things I learned from that session was that I discovered what really matters and what doesn't. Ann Landers once said, don't sweat the small stuff. And basically, it's all small stuff. So that reinvention just gave me a new placidity and approach to life that was in a completely different space than I was. In 1982, I had to reinvent myself again. I made a career change when the sugar factory shut down. Fortunately, a year before the shutdown, I had been taking classes over at Hartnell in electronics and computers, and I committed to taking a summer class that would allow me to have my electronics AA in June of 1982. And 2 weeks after I made that commitment, they announced they were shutting the factory down in August of 82. So I was prepared. I was ready. It took me about 6 months to land a job working at a computer store. And from then, I was there for 4 years, and I went to the county. 29 years later, I retired as a network engineer. So you can deal with external circumstances just as well as you can make decisions. Along the way, in 1984, I had gotten involved in square dancing. And because being a square dance caller involves music, it involves singing, and it involves the mathematics and topology of maneuvering dances around in a square, it was a natural fit for me. And so I started learning to square dance call. in 1985, got my first club. And by the end of the 80s, I was calling 5 nights a week. I've cut down a little bit, but it was an adventure. It was something to do that not only gave me pleasure, it gave my dancers pleasure. And so there was an element of altruism in that as well. My next big adventure was becoming a Toastmaster. I had been a square dance caller for 15 or 18 years. And there was a Toastmaster club forming just down the street from where I work. There was a flyer in the lunchroom, and I looked at it and said, well, I've been an MC on the stage being a square dance caller for 18 years. Maybe I have something to offer in Toastmasters. So I went to the club and I was hooked. Right away, it was both personal improvement and the altruistic element of being able to pass my knowledge on to somebody else. So all in all, I've gone through a number of different reinventions. I discovered in 2001 that I had hepatitis C, which probably came from contaminated blood transfusions in 1978, because in 1978, they didn't even have a name for hepatitis C. They called it non-A, non-B hepatitis. They didn't start screening the blood supply of donated blood for hepatitis C until 1992. And so starting in 2002, I went for 6 years, I went through 4 different courses of interferon and ribavirin therapy. It ravaged me. It changed my personality. It turned me into a snarling tiger. One of my doctors that I was under treatment with for a while told me about a patient they had. They didn't name him, of course, but they told me about a patient that they had who, after being on the interferon and ribavirin treatment for a couple of years, he changed from a really, really nice guy to somebody that went out and shot somebody. You know, it's a documented fact that treatment can turn you into a Mr. Hyde from your original Dr. Jekyll. But I got through it. I went from the interferon to Chinese herbs for another 7 years. Within 6 weeks of starting on the Chinese herbs, my liver enzymes went from terribly elevated to almost normal. And after 7 years, in 2014, a drug came out called Harvoni. Now, there are 26 different flavors of hepatitis C. Some are easier to get rid of than others. The one I had was type 1A, which is the queen bitch mother of them all. And it didn't respond at all to the interferon treatments. But with the Harvoni, I started on the day before Thanksgiving. And by the day I retired, the following May, it was gone. I'm done. So it was a wonderful change in my life. All in all, reinventing yourself can be an excellent way to find new avenues, to broaden your horizons, to help you cope with external circumstances that you have absolutely no control about. And it reminds me of the Serenity Prayer by Karl Paul Reinhold Niebuhr. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And so I challenge you to find something you would like to change and reinvent yourself. Madam Toastmaster.